Hello, I want to welcome you to the selling video for Ninth Space Calvary, which is a series of screenplays that started from one single movie. Let me tell you the history of Ninth Space Calvary, starting from that one single movie. About 5 years ago, I wanted to write a storyline covering what essentially human colonization of space would look like. 300-400 years down the line. And I think what became the central key point of the movie was to show a human government devoid of any alien influence. So aliens coming into it was not part of the equation. It was essentially the human colonization of space. And starting from that, it moved into what was governments like, what would happen when the colonies rebelled. And so we really created a key system of governments based upon Earth-like system of governments that were currently around. Ninth Space Calvary started with, again, I said a first movie. That was really First Fleet, Earth Core Defense Fleet, First Fleet, which was the name of the movie. And the short title was, of course, ED1. That movie covered 3 storylines. It got cut down into 2. The final draft actually does have the 2 storylines. The one storyline that got completely cut out of the movie was a storyline about the intelligence organization of Earth Core Defense Fleet, which was Argos. Argos being what we would consider your very secret service type organization, very tight-lipped, everything's written in code. It took on a life of its own, and it was so expansive it needed to be taken out so that it didn't overshadow the real plot line of the story, which revolved around what we now call the cartel invasion of Cirrus, or more specifically the Picard cartel, because each cartel is its own independent militia dedicated to illegal activities, most of which are in the Orion constellation of space. So we had taken that storyline, broke it down, put it back together, and you now had what was, in its pure form, the war to take back Cirrus. Attached to that, though, was to get the idea of that there were other governments and that there was a very governmental procedure on how all of this went. We had the Virgin River incident, which was completely tied to the cartel incident in the respect that the government known as the People's Republic of Draconis, or Draco, allowed the Picard cartel to invade Cirrus so that they did not have to worry about warring with them and could concentrate on their main enemy, which was the Alliance. The Alliance being a very Western-like government. So the Virgin River incident kind of covers the NATO-Warsaw Pact storyline, where you would have the Dracos, or the People's Republic, as the Warsaw organization, and the Alliance essentially as the NATO organization. But that's a very pure form to explain a very complex storyline. The People's Republic would eventually seize the Alliance warship known as the Virgin River, part of the Colorado warship group. And that created its own specific storyline. Laced into that storyline is telling the story of Captain Erwin Paulette and Rachel Quarnos, who are a fighter pilot and wing woman in a very modern space setting. The other end of that would be the Cirrus incident, where we covered the storylines of characters you'll know when Ninth Space Calvary is eventually produced. Paul Michel, Captain J.J. Jameson, Marine Commander Adama Keyes, and of course the very famous Argos operative Jack Davis. when that play was complete, I felt I had covered everything. I was not going to write a sequel. It was going to stand on its own. I spent 9 weeks in Los Angeles trying to sell the screenplay. Complete failure. I came back. I was bummed. I go, okay, what am I going to do now? And here comes a documentary on the Berlin airlift, which is another part of that whole Warsaw NATO history. And I said, well, this would be a cool thing to put into a screenplay. What would a space lift be like, where you would have the same problem or a similar type problem, as it would turn out, and how would Earth Core Defense Fleet, which became the natural group to do this, respond to it? And so that became the Great Space Lift, which was the second movie. It was essentially was the sequel of the movie, which created new characters. And of course, one of those new characters you'll know in Ninth Space Calvary, Susan Day, who is in Ninth Space Calvary, Captain Susan Day, captain of the Armadillo class transport group, essentially a very space-sized version of what we would think of as the C-130 Hercules or the C-5 Galaxy of transport spacecraft for moving goods around. Set into that as well, we had two other groups. The war with Iran was looming, and so they naturally became a group called the Theocracy, which is a government based on a religious type government that you would see in Iran or for another country, Israel, where you have a very religious wing of the government, which would be your courts and your leadership part of the government, and you have a very secular wing of the government, which would be kind of your council. So that storyline developed within its own right, went writing on it right through. Laced into that was where the space lift was launched from, which was another government called the Republic. The Republic is essentially a very modernized version of the United States, for all intents and purposes. It's separate from the Earth Core government, and it was key to make it separate from the Earth Core government and to keep the sort of United Nations type theme running through it, where you had 7 core governments, Earth Core being caught right in the middle of all of it. Essentially a England of its time, which at one point it was the government, it fractured into colonies, and now those colonies are at odds with separatist forms of government in space. So, we expanded on the Earth Core Accords, which were introduced but never really fully developed in Ninth Space Calvary, as keeping Earth Core, which was a specific amount of distance, as a pure peace park where any government could come and do commerce. So bringing that part of the United Nations part of it back into the Great Space Lift was key and essential. Also, I was able to develop the Argos storyline to where we got an even bigger picture of what Argos looked like. And they really took advantage of this natural disaster in the Theocracy space in order to essentially have a government of their own inside Theocracy space. So that played a part in the storyline of Great Space Lift, and kind of led to the creation of Ninth Space Calvary, which I started last year and am now on episode 5, although I have to rewrite episode 4 all over again because of a computer malfunction. So we're essentially now on halfway through episode 5, moving on to episode 6, and we have brought back all of our favorite characters: Paul Michel, J.J. Jameson, Adama Keyes, Jack Davis, George McKee, who played a big role in the Great Space Lift, is coming back. We couldn't bring Georgia Brown back from the Great Space Lift for anyone who picks that one up. I'm sorry, she died. You can't really bring back a dead character. Erwin Paulette will make a guest appearance in the first few episodes. Ninth Space Calvary came as a result of watching another movie. That would be the sequel movie of the Delta Force, starring Chuck Norris, where Chuck Norris and his military team take on the drug cartels in a secret war down in South America. And I said, that actually would be a core of bringing Earth Core back, in that same type of storyline where the cartels are now a threat to Earth Core security. Earth Core is, of course, the force, and specifically First Fleet, is the people who are supposed to deal with the cartels, but now the cartels are too powerful that it would be a disaster for the First Fleet to attack head on. And so President Ohim Bashir, who is the president of Ninth Space Calvary, Earth Core Space, decides to create a covert operations task group modeled on the Ninth Air Cavalry, which is a very real wing of the United States military. So we follow in Ninth Space Cavalry from the creation of the Ninth Air Cavalry through the cover story given to the United Nations like Council of the Earth Core Accords, to the actual attack on what is called the COSA cartel in Orion space, in specifically the Orion constellation. So that whole storyline has developed into what is the final essential TV storyline for Ninth Space Calvary. Our little quirky characters, we've got a few new characters in Ninth Space Calvary that were never seen in the first two plays. I think a large core was to bring back my favorite minor characters and make them major characters. Most notably in First Fleet, you had a guy by the name of Commandant Bannon, who Irwin eventually takes his job. He's promoted into the Joint Chiefs and eventually becomes the head of the Ninth Space Cavalry in the form of Admiral Bannon. We have another character I brought in. I absolutely love this guy. This guy will make you laugh. His name is Captain Adams, John Adams. His moniker is Quirky Adams, and he is a very eccentric kind of guy. You will absolutely love him. We brought back some of the favorites like Lance Bannon, who has been a minor character in both First Fleet and the Great Space Lift, and everybody who's read her character absolutely loves her, so it was essential to bring her back. We'll be bringing back George McKee as kind of an antagonist. We'll be bringing back Ingrid Illam, and we'll be bringing back a character who was introduced in the Great Space Lift, who is the right hand, and he is your puppet master in the play. He really controls the government. When you watch this guy operate, you will just absolutely cringe that there's a guy out there like this. And so in the whole, I mean, you take back, starting from the very original First Fleet movie to now, this progression is so cool to just look at, to just kind of gauge. Some of the space shot sequences will be huge, just the way they're written in terms of budget-wise, but the whole of the play is 90% dialogue, so it falls within pretty much budgets for independent movie theaters and TV companies. Somebody like Australia Broadcasting, for example, could pick up Ninth Space Calvary as a show and run it, and it would be a very Hollywood-style produced space show. It's nothing like it on TV. There's nothing like it in the movie theaters now. There's been very, very few times where you've had just a human-developed storyline. Humans fighting humans in space. So that makes it unique in and of its own right and worth at least taking a look at. So I'm John Morton, talking to you about Ninth Space Calvary, and I have created an email address. It will be ninthspacecalvary@yahoo.com. It's attached to this YouTube video. I hope you enjoy.